A starving grizzly bear, weak and on the verge of collapse, wandered alone into a small rural farm in the early hours of the morning. What happened next left the farmer, and eventually the entire town, speechless. She didn't growl. She didn't fight. She just lay down right there on his porch, too tired to move, too weak to run. What this man did next, and how the bear responded, would change both of their lives forever. You won't believe how far compassion can reach until you hear the end of this story. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. That's how we keep sharing stories of courage, wild encounters, and moments that remind us what it means to be human. It was just before sunrise when Walter Briggs stepped outside his farmhouse with a steaming mug of black coffee in hand. He was 67, a retired forestry worker turned part-time vegetable farmer. His hands were cracked from years of labor, his back crooked, but his routine never changed: feed the chickens, check the fence, sip his coffee on the porch. But this morning was different. The birds weren't singing. The dogs weren't barking. The forest around his property, usually filled with the hum of life, was quiet. Too quiet. Walter took one cautious step forward and immediately saw the shape. There, lying motionless at the edge of his wooden porch steps, was a massive grizzly bear. His heart stopped for a long moment. He didn't move. The bear wasn't dead. He could see her ribcage rising and falling, slow and shallow. Her fur was filthy, tangled with mud and burrs. Her paws were cracked, and her sides were visibly sunken from starvation. Walter didn't dare breathe too loudly. He knew what a bear could do, even one near death. But this one wasn't threatening. She wasn't aware of him at all. Her head rested against the wood, eyes half closed, tongue dry and out. She looked defeated. Like she had come there not to harm, but because she had nowhere else to go. He backed into the house, locked the door, and peeked through the window. Still breathing. Still not moving. Walter made a call to animal control, expecting them to answer with urgency. But it was Sunday. No answer. He called again. Left a message. Then sat by the window and watched. Hours passed. The bear didn't budge. The sun rose high. Her breathing grew slower. And Walter felt something shift inside him. A lifetime in the woods had taught him to fear and respect wildlife. But this was something else. This was suffering. This was a cry for help without sound. He took a risk. Opened the door. Stepped forward. She didn't flinch. He placed an old plastic bowl down, filled it with water, and backed away. For a long while, nothing happened. Then, slowly, she lifted her head and crawled toward it. The first time he saw her drink, his hands shook, because he knew this bear was dying. And somehow, without words, she had chosen him. The next morning came with frost in the air and tension in Walter's chest. The bear was still there. She hadn't moved far, only enough to rest her body against the corner of the porch. The water bowl was empty. Her fur glistened slightly in the morning dew, but her eyes remained heavy and sunken. She looked like she hadn't eaten in days. Walter opened the door slowly, holding a dented metal pot filled with softened oats, apples, and bits of leftover boiled potato. He didn't know what a starving bear should eat, but he knew it had to be better than nothing. He placed the pot near the steps, a little closer this time. Again, she didn't react violently. She sniffed the air, shifted slightly, and, with great effort, crawled forward. Walter watched, his breath held. And for the second time, she trusted him. Over the next few hours, she ate slowly. No growls. No defensive posturing. Only the silence of survival. Walter stayed on the porch, sitting with his back to the wall just a few feet away, sipping coffee like it was the most normal thing in the world. He didn't dare reach out. But he observed. That's when he saw it. Near her left shoulder blade, hidden under clumps of thick, matted fur, was something unnatural. Not a wound. Not a burr. Metal. Thin wire, cutting into the skin. His heart dropped. Walter had seen traps before, illegal snares used by poachers or careless hunters. This wasn't fresh. The wire had been there for weeks, maybe months. Embedded. Fused with skin. No wonder she was weak. She wasn't just starving, she was in pain. He went inside and returned with gloves, scissors, and an old pair of wire cutters he hadn't used in years. He approached slowly. She lifted her head weakly, watched him, but didn't move. As if she knew what he was trying to do. He crouched beside her, inches from the wire, and began cutting. Gently. Piece by piece. She didn't growl. She didn't flinch. Not once. Even when the last bit of metal came free, soaked in blood and fur. When it was over, Walter sat back on the porch, his hands shaking. The bear lowered her head and exhaled. Slowly. Like a breath she'd been holding for far too long. For a long moment, neither of them moved. He didn't call animal control again. He just sat beside her until nightfall. Bringing food. Cleaning the wound with warm water and iodine. She allowed it. No fight. Only the kind of trust that didn't make sense, unless you had nothing left to lose. By the third day, she stood on her own, wobbly but standing. And when she looked at Walter that morning, really looked, he saw something in her eyes he would never forget. Recognition. Not of him, not of the porch, not of the food, but of kindness and the memory of pain finally ending. The morning she disappeared, Walter felt it in his bones before he even opened the door. The porch was empty, no soft breathing, no hulking shadow curled beside the steps, no heavy eyes blinking at him with silent pain. She was gone. The bowl of oats sat untouched. The blanket he'd thrown over her 2 nights earlier, more out of instinct than logic, lay crumpled against the railing. Walter stepped outside slowly, scanning the frostbitten yard. His breath fogged in front of him. The forest beyond was quiet again, but this time, not in a threatening way. It was like something had passed through, and now, it had passed on. He didn't blame her. Maybe she'd found her strength. Maybe her instincts had finally kicked in. Maybe she just wanted to die in the woods, where no eyes could watch her fade. He spent that morning cleaning the porch, though not much needed tidying. The Ursa had left barely a mark, no torn wood, no claw scrapes. Just silence. And a strange, hollow ache in his chest. 3 days passed. Walter returned to his routine: chickens, fences, coffee. The neighbors didn't know. He hadn't told a soul. Not yet. He didn't want to. Some stories, he thought, should live only where they happened. Then, just before dawn on the 4th morning, he heard it. Scratching. Soft. Slow. Deliberate. He froze. The sound came again, from the side of the house. Walter grabbed the flashlight, opened the door, and there, standing in the mist, was the Grizzly. Thinner, but upright. Stronger. She didn't charge. Didn't flinch. She was only there for a moment. Then, she stepped aside. And Walter saw what she had brought. Two small, round shapes huddled at the base of the porch steps. Cubs. Tiny. Shivering. Eyes wide with fear, but not panic. They didn't run. They didn't cry. They just looked at him. Walter's heart hit his throat. She had cubs. That whole time, she'd been holding on for them. Fighting to stay alive. Dragging herself to his porch. Trusting a man she didn't know because she had someone else to save. She didn't stay. The mother turned, gave him one long, final look, then disappeared into the trees. The cubs remained. Alone. Left in his care. Not as an accident. But as a choice. Walter dropped to one knee in the snow. One of the cubs sniffed his boot, then curled against it. And Walter whispered the only thing that made sense. "You're safe now." The cubs were no bigger than Labrador puppies, fluffy, wide-eyed, trembling with every movement. Walter brought them inside. He had no other choice. They were soaked from dew, their tiny claws scraping softly on the porch as they huddled against each other. One limped. The other sneezed. He wrapped them both in old towels and laid them near the fireplace, unsure if he was doing the right thing or just delaying the inevitable. For the first time in decades, Walter searched the internet, not for news, not for weather, but for help. He found numbers for state wildlife offices, rescue centers, and a rehab facility in Bozeman that claimed to specialize in orphaned mammals. He hesitated. Then called. The voice that answered was young. Calm. Female. Her name was Danielle. And when he told her what had happened, not all of it, just the facts, she didn't laugh. She didn't question. She only asked. Are they still breathing? Can they move? Will you keep them warm? Then came silence. Then came. We'll come to you. That afternoon, Danielle arrived in a battered SUV with a vet named Brian and a crate filled with supplies. They wore gloves, soft clothes, and expressions full of both caution and awe. Walter led them inside. The cubs didn't growl. Didn't run. They simply blinked at the strangers. As if they somehow knew this was part of the path their mother had started. Danielle knelt slowly, examined them. When she saw the limp in the smaller one, she frowned. I think she carried them miles, she said softly. They've got frostbite starting in their paws, but they're not in shock. They're still fighting. Walter nodded. His voice cracked when he asked, Can you take them? Danielle paused. We can, she said. But I think she meant for you to keep them safe. Walter looked away. His throat tightened. They spent hours building a temporary enclosure in his barn, warm and straw-lined. Danielle gave instructions, taught Walter how to feed them with gloved hands and syringe bottles. Every detail was precise, gentle, but never distant. You're part of this now, she told him. They bonded to you. Walter chuckled bitterly. I'm just a farmer. She looked at him and said, Not anymore. That night, after they left, Walter sat in the barn as the cubs slept, curled together in straw. He thought of their mother. Of her silence. Her strength. Of the day she didn't run, but rested. Because she had trusted him. And now, her legacy, everything she had fought to protect, lay sleeping in his care. The cubs were stronger now. They played. Wrestled in the straw. One of them had started vocalizing, soft grunts that made Walter smile, even in the coldest mornings. He fed them on a schedule. Cleaned their space. Even talked to them like they were his own. He had stopped calling Danielle every day. Now, it was once a week. Her voice, always warm, always calm. She trusted him now. The same way the cubs did. And for the first time in years, Walter felt needed. Not for his land. Not for his tools. But for his heart. It was mid-March when the knock came. Firm. Twice. Not frantic. But not friendly, either. Walter opened the door. A tall man stood there. Brown hat. State-issued boots. A windbreaker with no logo. Afternoon, the man said, tipping his brim. Walter Briggs? Walter nodded. Depends on who's asking. The man smiled tightly. Name's Kent. I work with Wildlife Services. Just following up on a report we received, something about a bear sighting in this area near your property. Walter's chest tightened. Don't know much about that, he said slowly. Kent scanned the porch, the trees behind him. No damage to the chicken coop? Nothing unusual lately? Tracks. Walter's hands clenched at his sides. Nothing worth writing about. Kent nodded, but it was the kind of nod that said he didn't believe him. That night, Walter didn't sleep. He stood in the barn for hours, watching the cubs breathe, listening to the wind scratch the tin roof. He couldn't lose them, not after everything. Not after what their mother had trusted him with. The next day, he called Danielle. Told her everything. She didn't panic, but she didn't sound surprised either. We've heard of Kent, she said. He's not supposed to be working this region anymore. What does that mean? It means someone's poking around off record. And if he finds them here without permits, she didn't finish the sentence. Walter already knew. That night, he moved the cubs again, deeper into the woods, onto his neighbor's unused hunting land, where he built a new enclosure in the root hollow of a massive oak. He carried them one by one in his arms, bundled, silent, calm. They didn't struggle because they still trusted him. And that trust gave him the courage to do what most men his age wouldn't even attempt. He didn't just move them. He protected them. Like she had once done. And when he walked home in the dark, flashlight shaking in his hand, he knew something had changed. He was no longer a man guarding animals. He was a man keeping a promise to a mother who couldn't. The wind howled harder than usual that night. The trees groaned, and the stars vanished behind thick clouds. Walter stood in the doorway of the barn-turned nursery, lantern in hand, watching the cubs sleep. He counted, like he always did. 1. 2. Only one stirred. He frowned, stepped closer, checked the straw again. Just one. The bigger cub, the female, was missing. Walter's chest seized. He dropped to his knees, scanning the enclosure. There was no sign of struggle. No broken fencing. No blood. Just a small gap in the corner, barely wide enough for a curious cub to squeeze through, and tiny paw prints leading into the trees. He grabbed his coat, his boots, the old lantern from the wall. No hesitation. He followed the trail through darkness, step after frozen step. The prints veered off the edge of the hill, dipped into a shallow ravine. Walter's breath came in short bursts. His legs burned. He wasn't young. He wasn't fast. But he was afraid. Not of the woods. Not of the cold. But of failing her. Then he saw it, a shape in the snow, still. Small. Curled beside a fallen log. His heart shattered before he reached her. But when he did, she opened her eyes. She was breathing. Just barely. Her paw had gotten caught in something, a rusted wire snare, hidden under the snow. A trap. Old. Forgotten. Still deadly. Walter dropped to his knees and worked fast, even as his hands shook violently. His breath clouded the air. His eyes burned. And the cub just watched him. No sound. No struggle. As if she knew he would come. He freed her, wrapped her in his coat, held her to his chest, and whispered over and over, "I'm here. I've got you. I've got you." It took nearly an hour to carry her back. By the time he reached the barn, he was soaked in sweat and melted snow. He laid her down beside her brother, who nuzzled close immediately. She didn't move much, but she was safe. Walter didn't sleep that night. He stayed beside them both, hand on her side, feeling the rise and fall of each breath. And in the morning, when she licked his wrist, just once, he wept. Not because she was saved, but because he hadn't lost her. And in that moment, he realized this wasn't just about bears anymore. This was about family. The kind you don't choose, but find you anyway. Spring came like a soft exhale. The snow melted. The trees budded. And in the small clearing behind Walter's barn, 2 young grizzly cubs rolled in the grass, stronger now, heavier, louder, and free in a way they hadn't been since the day their mother left them on his porch. Walter watched from the fence, arms crossed, a small smile hidden in his beard. He knew this day would come. Danielle had been calling again. The center in Bozeman was ready. The permits were in order. The plan was to relocate the cubs to a protected wild reserve, far from poachers, from roads, from everything. It was the right thing. But it didn't feel like it. That night, Walter stood by the barn one last time. The cubs were asleep, their bodies rising and falling in rhythm. He walked in slowly, knelt beside them, ran his fingers gently across the thick fur on the male's shoulder. He whispered softly, "She saved herself so you could live. And now, I have to do the same." His voice cracked on the last word. The next morning, Danielle arrived with her team. They worked fast, quietly, respectfully. No tranquilizers. No force. Just crates lined with straw, a gentle approach, and trust, the same trust Walter had spent months building. The cubs went in without resistance. Not because they were tamed, but because they belonged to him. If only for a moment in time. When the van drove away, dust trailing behind it, Walter didn't go inside. He stood on the porch for hours. Jasper lay beside him, silent. The yard felt bigger. The forest, too quiet. But deep inside, Walter knew he hadn't lost anything. He'd been found. Days passed. Then weeks. He returned to routine, chickens, coffee, fences. But some mornings, he'd still fill the water bowl. Still leave the oats on the porch. Just in case. Then one evening, weeks later, just as the sun dipped below the ridge, Walter saw them. Not in the yard. Not on the porch. But on the edge of the tree line. 2 shapes. Tall. Still. Watching. One raised a paw. Then vanished into the shadows. Walter smiled. Not because he needed to see them again, but because they wanted him to see them. A final thank you. A silent goodbye. And a promise that what they shared, wild, impossible, beautiful, would never truly be gone. That night, Walter wrote something in his old leather notebook. Something simple. A mother came to me, dying.